Thank you so much. Okay. So success would be the biggest event in human history and maybe the last event in human history. Those were the words of a Berkeley professor of computer science called Stuart Russell. And they sound pretty worrying on the face of it. He's talking about the rise of general purpose AI, or AGI, that AI research is building towards. Now that started to worry me initially, but I had to build it into what I consider my New Year's resolution. So I usually have New Year's resolutions, I'm sure you do. They're always kind of the same ones: improve my Urdu, go to the gym, play a bit more tennis, right? But this year I have another one, which is learn to be optimistic. I'm going to try, in a world where there's so much to be gloomy about, to try and practice the resilience to be optimistic. So rather than get too worried by what Professor Russell is saying, I thought I'd try and learn a bit more about it. So just a little bit about me. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Sam. As Hamza very kindly said, for the last 4 years I've been an education advisor in the Federal Ministry of Education, first working on EdTech and then working on early learning. And I must admit that I am not really an AI expert, but I wanted, like lots of other people, to try and figure out a little bit about what all the fuss is about around AI. So I'm going to share a little bit of what I found out from the reading that I did, and share a little bit about what I think matters potentially for you guys in education and employment, and hopefully something a bit more practical as well. So, trying to be optimistic, trying to understand AI, I read 3 books. First one I read was called Human Compatible AI and the Problem of Control. Now that's a reasonably scary title. I started to get a little bit worried at that point. The second book that I read was called The Coming Wave, Technology, Power, and the 21st Century's Greatest Dilemma. Now that's even more terrifying, right? Okay, I'm still struggling to be optimistic at this point. The third one that I read was called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. How you become optimistic at this point, right? Terrifying. But I was like, well, I've got to be optimistic, and my wife says I have to be inspiring in front of the students of SICAS Lahore, so I'm going to still try and look on the bright side, right? So, with all that scary stuff said, I wanted to try and break it down, and maybe if I could understand it a bit more, it might seem a little bit less scary. So I wanted to break it down into 3 questions, right? Where are we at, from what I can see, and there are many more expert speakers who've gone ahead of me, but where are we at now in terms of AI? Where are we going? And this is where the book's got a bit scary, but also what might this mean, particularly for us as a species and for you? So where are we at? I won't repeat what much more expert speakers have said before me, and I think all of you kind of know where we're at currently with AI. But long story short, 1950, British computer scientist called Alan Turing said he wanted to find a machine that learns from experience. Fast forward 60 years, jumping a huge lots of developments in computing, but you've now got a company called DeepMind that basically set out in London to do something that it said solve intelligence. So that company was set up in King's Cross in 2010 with the specific goal to create machines so powerful that they could improve on or even surpass human intelligence in a range of functions. Now, as we all know, and I won't repeat it, AI seems to now be a really, really prominent part of so many aspects of life. It's an aspect of work, it's an aspect of your education. You guys are using it all the time. And it's moved even beyond simply language to, it can make films, it can make podcasts, it can track the stock market and so many other things. Also, interestingly and scarily, if you're worried about that sort of thing, it's starting to get weird, right? People are starting to have AI girlfriends. That's quite interesting. Apparently 1 in 4, according to the UK Guardian, 1 in 4 Gen Z would consider an AI wife or an AI husband. Now, I don't know if that's true. You guys will have to tell me whether that is acceptable or not. But that's just what I read. So, stuff's getting weird. Okay? But interestingly, when I was reading these 3 rather scary books, they weren't really that focused on where we are now. They weren't really focused on AI as it is and this model of ChatGPT or that model of ChatGPT. What they were saying is that wherever we are now in products that become marketable and that the public really get is way behind actually where the science is. And so I wanted to also just share a little bit of what I found out about where we might be going. And bearing in mind, I'm not an expert, your ideas are probably much more developed than mine. But what did they say about where we're going? 3 things kind of really struck me. The first thing was that we're not done yet with AI. That this is kind of just the beginning. And particularly like Professor Russell was saying at the start, the goal of AI research seems to have always been to create human level or even more than human level intelligence. And we're not even close, right? We are close in some areas. AI can do very specific things very well. Self-driving cars seem to be on the horizon, right? But they can't do a range of tasks. They can't be general purpose across a range of things. So it seems to be that the future plan might be that you could have an AI that could simultaneously do your work for you, do your cooking for you, look after your kids for you, and read them a bedtime story, right? So, first thing is, we're not even close, we're not even there yet. The second thing that interested me about where we're going was that it's not just about AI, that we're on the crest of a wave of different technological inventions, all of which are coming faster and faster down the track. And so the reason for that, from what I understood, is a couple of things. One is just like simple economics, right? So as more and more research, more and more money is put into something like AI, the proliferation of models gets wider, there's more competition, it drives costs down, there's more demand, so there's more money in it, which increases the likelihood that it just exponentially grows and grows and grows, right? So first is all of these technologies will develop because the demand is so great. But then the second thing is that an advance in one of these technologies, like AI, massively increases the chance that you can advance in another of the technologies. For example, nanotechnology or robots, robotics, right? Or something like biology. One of the books, interestingly, was focused on the fact that we're now at a turning point, not just in AI, in synthetic biology. That basically means we've figured out the code of life, right? We've figured out how to manipulate human genes or even animal genes. So we're at a flipping point in others. So there's, for example, in 2024, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to something called AlphaFold. AlphaFold is an AI program that can predict the shape of proteins. Now, if you can predict the shape of proteins accurately, scientists are much, much more able to figure out what's behind many diseases, what's behind how to improve vaccines. So, for example, AlphaFold was used to figure out the COVID virus, right? So, it speeds up advances in everything. The third thing that I learned, and this is kind of, we'll get onto the practical stuff in a second, but the third thing I learned is that the makers of this stuff, the people who are actually designing and who are in AI, are reasonably terrified. So that taught me something, right? The second book that I read was by Mustafa Suleyman, who's the head of AI at Microsoft. And it feels a little bit like, I don't know if you guys have seen the film Oppenheimer that came out recently, right? That moment where some scientist is responsible for creating something, but is absolutely terrified about what they're making. So, and I think as others have said, that doesn't necessarily mean it'll go wrong. It just means that we need to be really, really, really careful, right? So, as others have said, we're on the cusp of something. If we create something that is so powerful and so intelligent, we have the capacity to cure diseases that we've never managed to cure before. Stop traffic accidents. We can potentially give every child a personalized tutor that enables them to learn in their local language for life, right? It can guide parents to raise their children. But at the same time, as others have said, it can be used for terrible, terrible things that might be incredibly scary. We can genetically engineer life. it's probably not that far away that you can imagine the rich and famous potentially altering the genes of their children to make them smarter or even more handsome. So, that's all the science fiction stuff from what I was reading. But I wanted to just end by maybe thinking about something a bit more closer to home and a bit more practical and down to earth. Because what does this mean for us as a species, or more specifically for you guys as students? Now, you'll all be way ahead of me. You're all using ChatGPT already. You're using AI already. But I just wanted to think about 3 little things to finish off. One, I call them maybe the 3 E's: education, employment, and ethics. And I think underneath these things is basically, from my thinking, that the important thing in an age of ever more powerful machines that ever more replace human capacities is to think more deeply about what makes us human and to lean into that and to get really good at that. So education as a first one, right? I think it says on here, knowledge reigns supreme, right? Is the tagline of TEDxSICAS, right? But AI brings obviously massive questions for education. What do we learn? Like, what's the point of learning when machines are going to be able to read faster, write faster, produce code faster, do maths faster than humans? What are you actually here for? What are you learning in school if a machine's going to be able to replace that and do that better? So I think that has implications for the skills that you're getting here at school, right? And that you might want in employees later. And I'm sure others have said this, but I think in terms of skills, what's interesting is that it seems like employers value cognitive skills more and more, the ability to think more and more, at the same time as we're kind of outsourcing thinking more and more to machines. So World Economic Forum last week in Davos, there were discussions around what do employers want most? What skills do they want most? And it's analytical skills, critical thinking skills, cognitive skills, creativity, right? So I guess you kind of don't want to give those skills away to machines quite yet, right? If that's the things they're wanting. You might need in the future more human skills more than ever. Things like empathy, things like creativity, the ability to think critically. It might be that the difference between the really smart people and those who are left behind are not those who do and don't use AI or do and don't use machines, but someone who can critically evaluate what the AI is telling them, i.e. not just be like, oh, okay, AI has told me this or that or the other about the history of Pakistan or the history of the world, but to look at that critically and say, is that right? Can I compare that to other sources of information? To basically think for yourself. So skills is an important part of the education thing. The other thing, and I'm sure I'd be interested to talk to you guys after this because I'm sure you think about this a lot, and also your teachers. But the other thing I think that's really important for education is to think about where do you put your effort? And what I mean by that is that as it becomes easier and easier to take shortcuts, to do things like the machine can write your essay for you, right? Machine can do your literature review for you, machine can do your research for you. But to think about whether it's worth taking the shortcut or whether it's worth taking the long way around. And what I mean by that is that some of the ways of going the long way around, for example, reading a book all the way through thoroughly, writing the essay yourself, doing that kind of thing, might be, in the end, giving you more skills that might eventually make you more valuable, right? So, of course, it would be easier. You can keep taking shortcuts to keep taking shortcuts, but I guess what you've got to worry about is whether that actually diminishes over time your ability, right? In sports, this is called like atrophy, right? Like the withering away of muscles and things because you don't use them, right? What if you don't use the skills of reading anymore? Or you don't use the skills of thinking? Or we become so lazy that we don't develop them? Does that matter? I would argue it probably does matter. It's interesting to me that someone like Bill Gates, who is the richest man or one of them and completely drenched in technology, spends a lot of his time reading books. He's decided that he's not going to take that shortcut. So that's interesting, I think. The second E, and I'll finish soon, is around employment. And I think others are much more qualified than me to say about how AI is going to change the world of work. All I can tell you from my world of work is that it is changing it super fast and super rapidly. So my wife's company, for example, has just had a mandate that's come through the company that says everyone has to be 25% more productive, because all of their clients are telling them that they need to do everything faster. So speed and productivity is changing the world of work super fast. The thing that I think I have experienced that I'm just going to share with you is pretty obvious really, but like the need to reskill and have the flexibility to change during your career and during your world of work seems to me to be like super essential right now. The way I think about this is in terms of my own family, right? My granddad had the same job throughout his life. He started his job in one company when he was 21, he retired when he was 65 in the same company. My dad wiggled around a little bit in his career, changed companies a few times, but essentially stayed in the same career. I have radically changed my career 3 times over the past 10 years, right? And that's partly me, and because I can't really fix on anything with a particular certainty, and that's kind of my fault. But it also reflects kind of how quickly you're required to change and adapt. So I think things like being open to new technologies obviously is going to be helpful. Having kind of the ability to learn new skills really fast. Thinking about the fact that you might have to do one career and then retrain and do something else pretty soon, because the whole shift in the world of work may shift that around. So that flexibility, that adaptability will be super valuable going into the future. And then the third thing that I think is really important and just to focus on is ethics. And this is something that I think Mr. Sethi touched on. But if these guys are right, that this is going to be such a powerful super intelligence that's going to hold the key to life on Earth, then it becomes more important than ever, as far as I'm concerned, that we as people and as a society use it ethically for good and not for evil. So more than ever, it's not going to be just about intelligence or knowledge, it's going to be about morals. It's about what we want as a society. For example, are we going to use these tools to cure disease, to spread education? Are we going to do it to shrink the gap between people who are billionaires and who aren't? Are we going to do it to help people who are in far-flung areas who don't have access to clean water? And that requires political decisions, but that also requires just the ethics of us as a society. So it's not just about how smart you are. I think it'll be important in the future that we think about what it is to live in society and to care about each other and how these tools are useful. Thank you so much.